Dust curled around the tires of the worn-out pickup truck as it rolled to a stop near the main house of the sprawling ranch. The sun hung low in the Texas sky, casting a golden glow across the flat horizon. Anna stepped out, her boots crunching against the gravel, and took a deep breath of dry, earthy air. It smelled nothing like the city she had just left behind, and that was exactly what she needed. With a hand shielding her eyes from the sun, she looked around. Wide open fields, wooden fences stretching into the distance, and a few horses grazing lazily near the barn. It felt like stepping into another world. She wore a plain denim jacket, her hair pulled back in a tight bun, and clutched a small, scuffed suitcase that held everything she owned. She wasn't here for glamour or adventure. She was here to survive. A thin woman in her 50s, her face weathered but kind, walked down the porch steps toward her. "You Anna?" the woman asked, wiping her hands on a towel. Anna nodded. "I'm Mary. I run things in the house. You'll be cooking for the boys and keepin' the kitchen straight. You ever done ranch work before?" "No, ma'am," Anna said softly. "But I can cook. And I learn fast." Mary gave her a long, measuring look. Then she nodded once, not unkindly. "We'll see about that. Come on, I'll show you your room. You'll be in the loft above the kitchen. It gets hot in summer and cold in winter, but it's got a bed and a roof, and that's more than some get." Anna followed her through a creaky screen door into a rustic but clean kitchen. The smell of baking bread lingered in the air, mingling with something savory on the stove. It felt comforting, safe. A heavy wooden table sat in the center of the room, surrounded by mismatched chairs. Cast iron pans hung above the stove, and fresh herbs dried near the window. "You'll start tomorrow at 5. These boys eat like they've never been fed in their lives, and they don't wait around for no one," Mary said, placing a hand on her hip. "You'll do breakfast, lunch, and dinner. I'll help where I can, but it's your kitchen now. Understand?" "Yes, ma'am," Anna said again, already feeling the pressure settle on her shoulders. But she also felt something else, relief. Purpose. For the first time in a long while, she had a place to be. That night, she sat on her narrow bed in the loft, listening to the sounds of the ranch outside, the distant whinny of a horse, a radio playing faint country music in the bunkhouse, the creak of the porch swing below. The window was small but looked out onto the open field, where the moonlight made the grass shimmer like silver. She didn't know anyone here. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring. But it was a fresh start, and that had to count for something. Down below, the cowboys returned from the pastures, dusty and loud, boots clunking against the wooden steps, voices raised in jokes and curses. Anna peeked through a crack in the floorboards and saw them filter into the kitchen, tall, broad-shouldered men with sun-worn faces and dirt on their jeans. They smelled of sweat and hay and something wild. None of them looked up toward the loft. They didn't even know she existed yet. Except one. He was quieter than the rest, standing slightly apart, watching rather than laughing. His hat was pulled low, and his clothes, though worn, looked clean. His eyes briefly flicked upward, directly toward the loft window, and for a moment, Anna felt as if he had seen her. But then he turned away and disappeared into the hallway, silent as a shadow. She lay back on the bed, staring at the ceiling. Her heart was still heavy with the things she'd left behind, a messy breakup, an empty apartment, debts she couldn't pay, and family she hadn't spoken to in years. But here, no one knew her past. No one expected anything of her except 3 meals a day and maybe some decent biscuits. That, she could do. That, she was ready for. The sky was still dark when Anna's alarm buzzed. She reached over to silence it, blinking against the early morning chill in the loft. The thin blanket wrapped around her didn't do much to fight the cold, but she didn't complain. She had work to do. Pulling on her boots and rubbing the sleep from her eyes, she crept down the ladder and into the stillness of the kitchen below. The silence was heavy, broken only by the ticking of the old wall clock and the occasional creak of the wooden floorboards under her feet. She had never cooked for a dozen hungry cowboys before, but she wasn't about to let them think she couldn't handle it. The stove felt unfamiliar in her hands, every knob stiff and stubborn. The first pot of coffee sputtered and hissed like it was mad at her. The bacon burned on one side and stayed raw on the other. Her eggs were a disaster. Panic began to settle deep in her chest. She wiped her hands on her apron and forced herself to breathe. By the time the sun began to rise, casting orange streaks across the window panes, the kitchen was thick with smoke and chaos. Anna was rushing between the stove and the counter, trying to salvage what she could. Her hands were covered in flour, and sweat clung to her brow despite the early hour. The back door slammed open without warning, and the first of the cowboys stomped in. Boots dirty, shirts wrinkled, faces still bearing the weight of sleep, they piled into the kitchen like a wave. Anna froze for a second, caught off guard by how many there were. A few raised eyebrows. A couple of murmured, "Who's the new girl?" She quickly set plates out, praying the food was at least edible. One cowboy took a bite of biscuit and grimaced. Another poked at his eggs like they were foreign creatures. There were some snickers. Someone coughed awkwardly into his coffee. "This ain't what Mary used to make," one muttered under his breath. "I heard that," Anna said before she could stop herself, trying to force a smile. "Give me 2 days. I'll have it better." The room went quiet for a heartbeat before the murmurs picked up again. But this time, she noticed something else. He was there. The same quiet cowboy from the night before. The one who didn't laugh or speak much. He stood at the far end of the table, lifting his fork, examining the food with the same calm detachment he seemed to apply to everything. Anna held her breath as he took a bite. He didn't react. He didn't smile or frown or say a word. Just ate slowly, methodically, and when he was done, he stood, tipped his hat slightly in her direction, and walked out the door with the others. She didn't even know his name. After the last plate was cleared, Anna sank into one of the kitchen chairs, exhausted and disheartened. Her first morning had not gone well. She hadn't made a single proper conversation. No one had thanked her. The biscuits were too dry, the eggs too runny, and the bacon too charred. She wanted to cry, but she knew better than to waste tears on a rough morning. Life didn't pause for your emotions, not in the city, and certainly not on a ranch. Mary came in a little while later, took one look at the mess, and raised an eyebrow. "They eat it?" she asked. Anna nodded. "Most of it. Then you did fine. They'll grumble no matter what. Just don't let them walk over you. And try frying the bacon slower next time." Anna cracked a tired smile. Noted. She spent the rest of the morning cleaning the kitchen, scrubbing pans that hadn't seen soap in weeks, wiping down counters, and restocking shelves. As she moved through the motions, her thoughts kept drifting back to the quiet cowboy. There was something about the way he watched without judgment, without interest even, like he saw through everything and said nothing. She didn't know it yet, but he had noticed her long before she noticed him. And unlike the others, he wasn't laughing. He was watching, waiting, testing, and the day she found out who he really was, everything would change. But for now, Anna had only one goal: survive the next meal. The midday sun was relentless, casting a haze over the wide, open land. From the kitchen window, Anna could see the cowboys moving across the field like specks against the golden backdrop, riding, hauling, fixing fences. She watched for a moment as they worked in rhythm, their movements practiced and efficient. One of them stood out. Always did. He moved with quiet precision, not commanding with volume, but through presence. He didn't talk much, not like the others, but when he walked into a room, the air shifted. She still didn't know his name. He hadn't spoken directly to her since that first breakfast. But she had caught him watching more than once, just briefly, just a glance, and it made her pulse skip every time. He blended in with the other men. Dusty jeans, plain shirt, cowboy hat pulled low over sharp eyes. But he carried himself differently, like someone who didn't need to prove anything to anyone. Anna didn't know that Luke, the man she assumed was just another ranch hand, was actually the owner of the entire place. He had learned early that the best way to know a person was to see how they acted when no one was watching. When they thought no one important was paying attention. And so, while the others called her new girl, or joked about her lopsided biscuits, he observed her quietly, watching how she stayed after meals to clean every dish, how she cut her own portions smaller to make sure the food stretched, how she read old cookbooks at night under a dim light, trying to improve. He respected that. He admired it more than he cared to admit. Anna, meanwhile, was trying to navigate her role in this unfamiliar world. She had no interest in impressing the cowboys, but she needed to keep her job. So, she started learning what they liked. Jack preferred his eggs over easy, Ray always added hot sauce to everything, and Cole hated onions. She listened without asking, adjusted quietly. Day by day, the plates came back a little cleaner. The comments, a little kinder. No one praised her out loud, but their silence became less harsh. And still, he said nothing. Every now and then, she found small signs someone was paying attention. A sack of better flour left by the door. A new pan mysteriously appearing by the sink. Extra firewood stacked near the stove when the wind grew colder. No one ever claimed credit, but she had her suspicions. One afternoon, as Anna was pulling cornbread from the oven, the screen door creaked open. She turned, expecting Mary or one of the rowdier cowboys, but it was him, Luke. He stepped in, not saying a word at first. Just scanned the kitchen, eyes settling briefly on the cornbread cooling on the counter. "Smells good," he said simply. It was the first time he'd spoken to her directly. "Hope it tastes better than breakfast did," Anna replied with a small, nervous smile, wiping her hands on a towel. "Still learning what works around here." Luke leaned slightly against the doorframe, arms crossed, the brim of his hat shadowing his face. "You're doing fine," he said after a pause. "They're just slow to warm up to anyone new." She was surprised by the kindness in his tone, gentle but steady, like the wind that carried dust across the ranch. "Thanks," she said, unsure of what else to offer. "You don't say much, do you?" He gave a faint shrug. "I watch. People say more when they think no one's listening." With that, he turned and walked out, the door swinging shut behind him. Anna stood there for a long moment, heart ticking faster than usual. That night, as the sun dipped low and the horizon turned pink and blue, Luke stood out by the corral, watching the cattle graze. One of the ranch hands walked by and clapped him on the back. "You gonna tell her who you are?" he asked with a grin. Luke didn't answer, just stared off into the distance, the corners of his mouth turning up ever so slightly. "She's not ready," he murmured. "And maybe I'm not either." He'd built a life away from spotlight, away from the expectations of being the man who owned half the land in that part of Texas. And now, for the first time in years, someone was seeing him not as a title, but simply as a man. And he wasn't about to mess that up, not yet. By the end of her first week, Anna had found a rhythm. She rose before dawn, lit the old stove, and moved through the kitchen like it was a dance she was slowly mastering. Her biscuits were no longer flat, her bacon no longer burned, and the cowboys, though still quiet and rugged, had started leaving their plates clean. No one complimented her directly, but the silence had shifted. It wasn't cold anymore. It was content. She began to learn more than just their names. Jack told bad jokes that made the others groan. Ray always complained about the heat, even when it was cold. Cole secretly loved sweet tea, even though he insisted he preferred black coffee. But Luke, the quiet one, the watcher, still kept mostly to himself. He'd come in, eat without fuss, and leave just as quietly. Yet somehow, he always seemed to be listening, even when his eyes weren't on her. Anna began noticing small changes around the kitchen. One morning, she opened the pantry to find bags of fresh flour and cornmeal where stale ones had been. A new rolling pin appeared beside the old warped one. A crate of fresh vegetables, still speckled with dirt, was left just outside the back door before sunrise. There was no note, no mention of it by any of the ranch hands. But the boots that had left the faint trail in the dust that morning. They were wider than most. Worn but carefully kept. They matched the man who always arrived early, silent as the sun, and left before the chatter began. That evening, Anna stood on the back porch, cradling a mug of tea as the horizon turned copper and lavender. Horses stood still under the fading light, and the sound of crickets rose steadily with the dusk. She could see him in the distance, walking the fence line alone, his shoulders relaxed in the quiet of the evening. Luke looked like he belonged to the land, part of it, not just a man on it. She hadn't asked for kindness. She wasn't used to it anymore. In her old life, gestures like that came with strings. But here, things were different. Things were quieter, gentler. Like people were trying to help without needing recognition. One morning, as she stirred gravy over the stove, Mary came in carrying a stack of linens. She glanced at the basket of vegetables by the counter and raised an eyebrow. "Somebody sure wants you to stay," she said casually. Anna gave a half smile. "You think it's Luke?" Mary shrugged. "He doesn't say much, but I've seen him watching out for the ranch hands since he was a boy. Only now, he watches you too." Anna blinked. "He's worked here that long." Mary looked at her, amused. "Worked here? Honey, Luke owns the whole place." The spoon slipped from Anna's hand and clattered against the pot. "What?" she whispered. Mary didn't elaborate. She just walked out, leaving Anna standing there with her heart suddenly pounding louder than before. She looked toward the window, toward the barns and the pastures beyond. Luke, the owner. The man who had eaten her terrible first breakfast without a word of complaint. The man who hauled feed and mucked stalls like everyone else. She thought of the quiet glances. The silent gestures. The vegetables. The tools. It was him. That night, when the cowboys gathered outside the bunkhouse to drink and talk, Anna stayed inside, hands buried in soapy water, mind spinning. She felt foolish, embarrassed even. How could she not have seen it? But then, she remembered how he had treated her, without entitlement, without arrogance. He had let her find her place without interfering. That kind of power in a man who didn't wield it like a weapon, it unsettled her. Later, when she went to her loft, a small jar of honey sat on the top step with a note written in pencil on a scrap of brown paper. "Goes well with cornbread, L." She held the jar in her hands for a long time, staring at the handwriting. It was the first time he had signed anything. The first time he'd directly acknowledged his silent help. She didn't know what to make of him yet. But in a world where she'd once been invisible, someone had noticed. Not just her cooking, but her effort, her struggle, her heart. And it felt like something was beginning. Quietly, gently, but undeniably real. The storm rolled in faster than anyone expected. What had started as a calm afternoon quickly turned into an ominous sky thick with charcoal clouds. The wind picked up across the fields, scattering loose hay and rattling the wooden fence posts. From the kitchen window, Anna could see the horizon darkening, the once golden fields turning a murky gray. She wiped her hands on her apron and stepped onto the porch, squinting into the distance. The cattle had started to bunch together, sensing what was coming. Horses neighed anxiously from the barn. The air was heavy with tension and electricity. She hadn't grown up with storms like this. In the city, thunder was a distant sound, muted by buildings and traffic. Out here, it felt close, wild and raw, like the sky could split open any second. The wind tugged at her hair as she descended the steps, her boots already kicking up dust. Just as she turned to go back inside, a sharp, panicked cluck cut through the air. The chicken coop. She ran. Rain started to fall in thick, uneven sheets as she crossed the yard. The co-op, a small wooden structure near the edge of the field, was rattling violently. The door had come loose, banging against the frame. The chickens inside flapped and clucked in panic. Without thinking, Anna threw herself against the door, trying to latch it. Wind slapped at her body, tugging her jacket open, soaking her within seconds. Her hair whipped across her face, her fingers numb as she fumbled with the latch. A sudden gust knocked her sideways, and her boot slipped in the mud. She fell hard, her head hitting the corner of the coop with a dull thud. The world spun, then went dim around the edges. The rain came down harder, drumming against the ground, drowning everything in white noise. Somewhere in the chaos, she heard a voice shouting her name, muffled and far away. Then everything went black. Luke had been inside the barn, securing the last of the hay when he saw her running. He watched as she sprinted through the storm, too fast, too reckless. His gut twisted. Something was wrong. When she didn't return, and the wind howled louder, he dropped everything and ran. He found her crumpled in the mud near the chicken coop, her body half soaked and motionless, one hand still curled around the broken door latch. Panic surged through him in a way he hadn't felt in years. "Anna," he called, kneeling beside her, pressing his fingers to her neck. Relief washed over him when he felt the slow, steady pulse. Gently, he lifted her into his arms, shielding her from the rain as best he could. She was lighter than he expected, but cold, too cold. He carried her back toward the main house, wind battering against him, rain soaking through his shirt. The other ranch hands were still in the barn, unaware. He didn't shout for help. He didn't want a crowd. He just needed to get her safe. Inside the house, he kicked the door open and laid her down gently on the couch by the fireplace. His hands moved quickly, tossing logs into the hearth, striking a match. The fire roared to life, casting flickering light across her pale face. He grabbed blankets, wrapped them around her, then knelt beside her, brushing damp hair away from her forehead. "Come on," he whispered. "You're tougher than this. For what felt like hours, he sat beside her, warming her hands in his, drying her face with the edge of a towel. She stirred at last, her eyes fluttering open, confused. "Luke," she whispered hoarsely, her voice barely audible over the storm still raging outside. "I'm here," he said softly. "You hit your head. Just stay still." She blinked up at him, brow furrowed. "The chickens. They're fine," he said with a half smile. "You saved them." A weak smile touched her lips, then faded into a wince. Of pain. "That was stupid, wasn't it?" Luke chuckled quietly. "Yeah, brave, but stupid." Their eyes met, and for a moment, the storm outside didn't exist. There was only the warmth of the fire, the hush of the wind beyond the walls, and the undeniable truth that something had changed between them. Something that neither of them could ignore anymore. The days after the storm passed quietly, though something had shifted beneath the surface. Anna recovered faster than expected, thanks to Luke's quiet care and the steady rhythm of work that never paused on the ranch. But her thoughts were tangled. Every time she saw Luke, something tightened in her chest, not just because he had carried her through the storm, but because of what Mary had said. That Luke wasn't just another cowboy. He was the man who owned everything around her. She hadn't confronted him about it, not yet. But the more she watched him, the more the truth became undeniable. He wasn't just respected among the other ranch hands. He was deferred to. When something broke, they looked to him before fixing it. When a decision needed making, they waited for his quiet nod. And Luke never announced his authority. He never needed to. One warm afternoon, she carried a tray of lemonade and sandwiches out to the main barn. The sun was high, and most of the men had taken a short break in the shade to cool off. Laughter echoed from the barn as she approached, their conversation loud and relaxed. But as she stepped inside, everything quieted, too quickly. She handed off the tray with a small smile, trying to ignore the awkward pause. She was about to turn and leave when a voice spoke low and clear. "She still doesn't know." It was one of the younger ranch hands. He hadn't seen her enter. "She'll figure it out," someone else muttered. "She already has," came another voice. This one wasn't teasing. It was calm, solid. Anna turned her head toward the source and locked eyes with Luke. The barn fell silent again. She stood there for a heartbeat, tray still in her hands, unsure whether to speak or turn and walk out. But then she heard herself say it aloud, soft but steady. "Is it true?" Luke didn't flinch. He looked at her for a long moment, then gave a slow nod. "Yeah, it's true." A dozen thoughts raced through her mind at once: shock, confusion, embarrassment. Her hands felt suddenly too full, and she set the tray down on a hay bale. "You let me think," she trailed off, shaking her head. "You let me think you were just one of them." "I am one of them," he said quietly, stepping closer. "But I didn't want you to treat me any different." She laughed, bitter and breathless. "That's easy for you to say. You own this whole place, and I was just a woman trying not to get fired for burning bacon." The others were suddenly very interested in their boots, edging away without a word. By the time Anna turned again, the barn was empty, just her, Luke, and the tension stretching thick between them. "I wanted to see who you were," he said softly. "Not how you act when you know someone's watching. And I did see. You're strong. You work harder than most. You didn't ask for help even when you needed it. That matters more to me than if you know my name's on the deed." Anna crossed her arms, still stung. "So what was I? A test?" His jaw tensed. "No. You were a reminder." She frowned. "Of what?" He took a step closer, pausing like he wasn't sure he should continue. "Of what it means to earn something. I inherited this place, but you showed up with nothing. You earned your place here. You've made it better, whether you know it or not." The honesty in his voice chipped away at her anger. She wanted to stay mad. She wanted to tell him he'd tricked her. But a deeper part of her, the part that remembered the fresh flour, the honey jar, and the firelight after the storm, knew he hadn't lied. He just hadn't spoken yet. "You should have told me," she said quietly. "I know." She looked down, her voice softer now. "I don't care about your name on some piece of paper. I care that you helped me when you didn't have to. That you saw me when I was invisible to everyone else." Luke's eyes met hers again, steadier this time. "I saw you from day one, Anna." She stood in silence for a long moment. Then, without another word, she picked up the tray and walked slowly back toward the house, her heart pounding harder than it had during any storm. The kitchen was unusually quiet that evening. The cowboys had eaten quickly and cleared out to the bunkhouse, leaving Anna alone with the clatter of dishes and her thoughts. The lantern above flickered softly as she stood at the sink, her hands submerged in warm, soapy water. Her fingers moved automatically, scrubbing plates, rinsing pans, stacking them one by one, but her mind wasn't on the dishes. It was on him, Luke. She hadn't spoken to him since the confrontation in the barn. He hadn't tried to explain further, and she hadn't asked. But his words stuck with her, looping in her mind. You've earned your place here. That strange mix of admiration and restraint in his voice, the way he'd looked at her, not like someone he was studying, but someone he finally saw for real, had unsettled her in a way she couldn't name. She'd come to the ranch expecting nothing but hard work and a roof over her head. She had not expected to find someone who paid attention to the details she didn't even know she was revealing. She hadn't expected to be cared for without being asked to owe anything back. She dried her hands and turned toward the window. Outside, the sky was streaked with fading shades of rose and indigo. The barn lights glowed faintly in the distance. She knew Luke was still out there, doing what he always did, finishing the day long after everyone else had quit. She thought of how he moved, slow and steady, always with purpose. The way he noticed things no one else did. The way he never needed to speak loudly to be heard. Anna stepped out onto the back porch without fully meaning to. The evening air was cool, the wind soft against her skin. She saw him near the corral, leaning on the fence, watching the horses. He didn't turn when she approached. He didn't need to. Do you ever sleep? She asked gently. Luke smiled without looking at her. Not when there's still work to be done. She moved closer, standing beside him, both of them silent for a while. The horses shifted in the grass, tails swishing. The night wrapped around them like a loose blanket, calm, comfortable. I've been angry with you, she said finally. I know. But not for the reason you think, she added, glancing sideways at him. I wasn't mad because you didn't tell me who you were. I was mad because you made me feel something, before I even understood who you were. Luke turned to her now, his expression unreadable. I've spent a lot of time trying to keep my head down, she continued. Trying to survive. I didn't come here to be seen. I came here to disappear. You didn't disappear, he said quietly. You stood out. Anna looked at the ground, kicking at a loose stone with the toe of her boot. And you made it harder to stay invisible. Would you rather I hadn't? She hesitated, then shook her head. No, but it scares me. He didn't push her. He just let the silence stretch again, and somehow, that patience was more comforting than any words. She had spent too long around people who demanded things from her, her time, her trust, her loyalty, without offering anything real in return. But Luke didn't ask. He just showed up. Again and again. She turned to face him fully now, her voice softer. You could have let me struggle. Watched me fail. Most people would've. But you didn't. Luke's gaze held hers. I didn't want to see you break. You didn't know me. I didn't have to, he said. I could tell you were holding too much. I recognized it. They stood there in the quiet dusk, eyes locked, the space between them charged with everything unsaid. Anna took a slow step closer. I don't know what this is, she whispered. But it feels different. Luke reached up, gently brushing a strand of hair from her cheek, his touch light, uncertain. It is. They didn't kiss. Not yet. But something passed between them, real and unspoken, like a promise waiting for the right moment. For the first time in a long time, Anna didn't feel like she had to run. Not from her past, not from herself, and not from him. And under that vast Texas sky, they just stood, two people who had been alone too long, finding something unexpected in each other. The morning sun filtered softly through the kitchen windows, casting golden streaks across the worn wooden floorboards. Anna stirred a pot of grits on the stove, humming faintly to herself, the sound of sizzling bacon filling the air. It had become her ritual now, this quiet moment before the chaos of the day began. The ranch was waking slowly outside, boots scuffing in gravel, horses neighing in the distance, a dog barking once or twice near the barn. Everything felt different, though nothing had really changed. The kitchen still smelled like coffee and bread, the sun still rose over the same fields, but something unspoken now lingered between her and Luke. It lived in the pauses when he passed her on the porch, in the quiet moments where their eyes met but words stayed locked behind tight smiles. She had kept her heart guarded for so long it felt strange to let someone in, even just a little. But Luke, he didn't knock on the door of her heart. He simply waited outside, patient, until she was ready to open it herself. As she placed the last plate of breakfast on the table, she noticed a folded note resting beside the coffee pot. Her name was scribbled on the outside in unmistakable handwriting, Luke's. She paused, wiping her hands on her apron, then slowly unfolded the paper. This ranch needs more than a cook. It needs a heart. Will you stay? It wasn't poetic. It wasn't dramatic. But it hit her harder than anything anyone had said to her in years. She read it again. Then again. Her fingers trembled slightly as she folded it back up, clutching it to her chest like it was something fragile and precious. She stepped out onto the porch, scanning the yard. The cowboys had mostly scattered, some at the barn, others by the corral. But Luke stood near the fence line, as if he knew she'd come looking. She didn't wait. Her boots carried her down the steps, across the dirt yard, her breath catching in her throat with every step. He turned as she approached, the brim of his hat tipped back just enough to reveal his eyes, steady, waiting. "You left a note," she said, stopping a few feet in front of him. "I figured I'd let you answer without a crowd," he said, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "Didn't want to put you on the spot." Anna held up the note, still folded in her hand. "This is a funny way to make a proposal." Luke tilted his head slightly. "It's not a proposal. It's an invitation." She narrowed her eyes playfully. "To what, exactly?" "To build something here. With me. If you want it." He didn't step closer, didn't try to fill the space with charm or promises. He just waited. "I know you're not used to people needing you for more than what you do. But I need you for who you are." Anna felt the knot in her chest begin to loosen. Slowly, carefully, she closed the space between them. Her voice was quiet, but clear. "I came here because I had nowhere else to go. I stayed because I needed to start over. But now," she looked up at him, heart full. "Now I want to be here. With you." Luke exhaled softly, as though he'd been holding his breath. "So that's a yes." Anna reached out and took his hand, warm and rough from years of work. "It's a let's find out together." He smiled then, wide and real, the kind of smile she hadn't seen from him until now. The kind that wasn't guarded or distant. They stood there, the wind gently rustling the tall grass around them, the morning sun casting a soft glow over the ranch. It wasn't a fairy tale. It wasn't the end of something hard. But it was the beginning of something honest. Something rooted in small acts of kindness, quiet strength, and a love that had grown not from grand gestures but from silent understanding. And for the first time in her life, Anna felt like she truly belonged, not just to a place, but to someone who saw her, all of her, and still wanted her to stay.